My name's Benjamin, and I was bullied relentlessly by my family, mainly my siblings. Well, I decided, you know what, I'm sick of it. I'm going to just cut this toxicness off from my life altogether. Until one day, out of the blue, my grandparents call me up, who, by the way, are absolutely filthy rich. And they tell me, I'm taking you out of the inheritance if you don't reconcile with your family. Well, you know what I told them? I said, you know what? I don't care how much money you offer me. I don't care if you offer me all the inheritance. I'm not going to reconcile because they don't deserve my love and attention. Well, guess what my grandparents had to say about that? A few weeks ago, I made the decision to move away from my toxic family and just cut them off for good. And I've never been happier. This comes after a long history of abuse and toxicity. My family's been awful since I've known myself, but for some backstory. I have 3 siblings, 2 sisters, Carmen and Julia, and a brother, Nick. Nick is the oldest, followed by Carmen, then me and Julia. Julia was the surprise child. She and I were born only 20 months apart. Carmen and Nick loved to fight each other. I'm talking about fights that would end with both of them bruised and broken up. One time they were fighting over the backyard swing. Carmen had been hogging it the whole afternoon and Nick wanted a turn. I knew better than to even ask to use the swing when they were around. But more on that later. The fight started how their fights always start, with them taking swipes at each other. They would gradually hit each other harder and harder until they were both screaming and crying. Nick started pushing Carmen, who was still on the swing, and he ended up pushing her so hard that the rope snapped while she was in the air. She landed in the grass and did not even move. I had to run into the house and tell my mother what was going on. She did not believe me and told me to stop bothering her. More on her and my father later. I got to the point where I was screaming and crying, telling her that Carmen was on the ground, not moving, and I had to be around 5 years of age. I thought I just witnessed my sister die, which was extremely traumatizing. Carmen had to be rushed to the hospital in our family car. She had a broken arm, a sprained neck, concussion, and had to stay for a few days. When my father got home, he blew up on Nick and my mother, telling them that they were careless. He said my mom was a crap parent, and she, said he was garbage as a provider. There's only 2 things you need to know about my parents. Number 1, they really don't care about their kids. They used us as pawns to tear down each other because, number 2, my parents hated each other. I don't think I've seen a more miserable marriage in my entire life, and the only reason they stayed together is because of my dad's family is just extremely traditionalist and does not really believe in divorce. And we live in a state that doesn't have a single-party divorce. They would fight so much, constantly screaming at each other, insulting each other, and they would fight over the simplest things until it escalated out of control. They'd argue over dinner, during car rides, and even during vacations to the lake. In public, they were the perfect couple. They went to church together, hold hands, and smiled because they needed to fool everybody in our small town into thinking their marriage was absolutely flawless. But behind closed doors, it was everything but. They'd physically fight each other too. One time, they got into an argument about the bills, and Dad decked Mom so hard that he broke her nose. The cops were called and my father was actually arrested. He spent 2 nights in jail before his mother told the police it was an accident and dropped the charges. I heard she was pressured into it by my dad's side of the family. That and she and father had this facade going in our small town where they led people to believe that they were this perfect, well-adjusted family. Now that I know how adults are supposed to actually act, their behavior is sickening. I'm sure Carmen and Nick learned from them. What's interesting about all this is that I did not even realize my family was toxic until I got exposed to a non-toxic family. My best friend had invited me to a weekend sleepover, and the atmosphere at his house was so different. His parents clearly loved each other. When his mom made dinner, she cooked enough for everybody to be able to get seconds. His dad always made sure we had snacks and were comfortable. There was no fighting, no screaming, and his older brother even let us use his Xbox. Well, for my entire life up until that point, I have been gaslighted into thinking that families just fought all the time. I was told by my parents that it was normal for siblings to never get along. Mom and Dad got on each other's nerves sometimes, but hey, they still loved each other. We all still loved each other. Yeah, right. Carmen and Nick hated my guts, I was sure of it. Speaking to my older siblings, the only time they get along was when they were ganging up on me. They could not gang up on Julia because she would cry and scream so loud that my parents would do anything to shut her up. So Carmen and Nick would get yelled at if they picked on her. So they bullied me instead. At dinner, they would swipe food from my plate until I was left with basically crumbs. When I'd ask my mom for more, she would tell me to stop being greedy, and many nights I'd go hungry because I'd get 2 spoonfuls of food in my mouth before Carmen and Nick would swipe it all. At first, I would eat more lunch at school just to compensate for the lack of food at home. I had a couple friends who were willing to share some lunch with me. I would literally stash some of it into my bag just to eat on later. The problem with this plan was, I shared a room with Nick. If he saw me eating anything, he would either take it for himself or rub his gross feet all over it so I could not eat it. So, what I had to do was wait in the kitchen while my mom was cooking and eat as soon as she was done. By the time Nick and Carmen came in, I'd be almost done, so they'd have nothing to swipe. But whenever I'd get clever with them, they'd find new ways to torture me. It was easiest for Nick since we had to share a room. But he was so gross. From when we were younger, he did not like taking a bath. Our room would always reek and smell because his clothes would just be so gross and sweaty 24/7. I would take extra thorough showers just to make sure the stink did not stick to me. If I went to bed before him, he'd smack me with a towel or fart on my head. Carmen's abuse was more emotional. She'd constantly call me ugly, insult the way I dressed and the way I did my hair, and just generally make fun of me every chance that she got. I hated her. One time, she and Nick hid all of my underwear in the backyard. I was forced to wash and wear the same one over and over again, until I saved up enough of my lunch money to buy a fresh pack from Walmart. My mom found them months later and yelled at me for it. That was the last straw for me. I went to my dad and asked him if I could sleep in the storage space in the attic. He said, yeah, wherever. And I got to work cleaning out all the junk from up there. I waited until Nick was not around to move all of my stuff out of our room. The storage space was small, but no one liked going up there, so I did not have to worry about Nick and Carmen bothering me at all. At this point, I was in high school and looking for little jobs to make some extra cash. My best friend's dad owned a diner in town, and we'd wait tables and do dishes there in the summer on our days off from school. I used the money to buy myself a radio and an MP3, since my parents and siblings hogged the television 24/7. I also bought myself some posters and just stuff to make the space less depressing. This was the second time I'd felt genuinely happy at home. That was until Nick and Cameron stole my stuff. I got home one day from work and could not find my radio or MP3 player. Some of my journals were missing and my posters were torn in half, and my clothes were just thrown all over the place. On top of that, I was missing money and I had been saving up for an Xbox. Mind you, at this point they were both adults, but neither of them were working or going to college. They either lounged around the house all day, doing nothing, or rode around town with their friends. My parents did not seem to care that they were doing nothing with their lives. I went to them and politely asked for my stuff back. I did not care that much about the posters, but I wanted my radio. I wanted my MP3 player and my money. They said they did not touch my stuff, but I was sure it was them because Nick's stink lingered into the room. Anyways, since they were adamant that they did not do it, I called the police and told them that somebody had broken into the house and stole my stuff. They got there half an hour later. My mom was so shocked and so angry, and she started cussing at me and getting physical, asking why did I call the police? I could have just asked for my stuff back. Well, I told her I could not get my stuff back. The police told her to calm down and stop hitting me. I should mention that they knew these officers. They came into the diner after their shift almost every afternoon. I told them everything that was missing and damaged, and they asked Nick and Carmen if they'd seen who did it. The two of them got scared and confessed that they have gone through my room, but it was just a prank. The cops told them that stealing and destroying property was no prank, and that he had half a mind to arrest them. Again, this is a small town, so that would look bad on our family, and we did not have a glowing reputation as it is. My mom, she begged him not to arrest them, because that would ruin her and Dad's perfect family facade. The cop told them to return everything they'd stolen and replace everything they damaged within a week. I later learned that the reason the cop was so hard on them was because my brother and sister had gotten into some nefarious dealings. But hey, we'll talk about that a little more later. You think that would have been the last straw for me, but oh no! The last straw happened years later. I was in community college. I was studying culinary arts while still picking up shifts at the diner to help pay for my classes. My sister and brother were still freeloading off my parents, of course. Sometimes they would disappear for days at a time. I did not care to know what they were getting into at all, and anyways, my parents approached me and asked if I could start helping them pay bills and buy groceries. I asked them why they did not ask Carmen and Nick to pay any bills, though. They said those two did not do well enough in school and simply can't hold down a job or fend for themselves, so they could not expect them to be responsible. Which is the most bullcrap excuse I've ever heard. I told them, hey, listen, I can't afford school. Well, all my money was going towards paying for schooling, and they said I should quit. I already had a steady job at the diner, so I did not need to go to college anyways. And the money would go a long way in helping them and my younger sister. Remember what I said about them using their kids as their pawns? Well, at that moment, I realized these people did not actually care about my well-being. My whole life, they've been doing the bare minimum parenting, basically treating me like a pet. They made sure I was fed and watered, but I could not get anything more from them. Never once did they tell me they loved me or do anything when Carmen and Nick were basically torturing me. They never came to any PTA meetings at school, never spoke to any of my teachers, and never even asked me how school was going. They were never emotionally available and never considered or cared about my feelings, ever. That was the first and only time they ever sat me down for a talk, and it was to tell me to quit going to school so I could give them my money. Well, it's safe to say that I was livid. I told them that I'd think about it and went straight to my room. I started making some calls to find myself a place to live. My best friend's parents said I could use the upstairs space in the diner if I wanted, and I just needed to clean it out first. It was my childhood all over again. I used my spring break to clean the place up and moved my stuff out not long after. I made sure my parents weren't home when I did it, and all I left them was a note, telling them not to contact and not to come find me, and I wanted nothing to do with them anymore at all. I would not call, I would not text, nor would I be going to any special family occasions. I no longer considered any of them family. And if I'm being honest with myself, They never were.
Since then, I've gotten my degree in culinary arts, and I now have my own place and work as a junior chef at a restaurant. The sous chefs have been mentoring me, and I'm learning so much, guys. I've also been going to therapy. It's going to take years to undo this damage from years of abuse, and I'm in the best place financially and mentally I've ever been in my life, and it only took cutting off my cancerous family. I have not heard from them, so at least they've respected my wishes a bit, but I've heard about them. Apparently, Cameron has a kid. Yeah, that's right, a little girl. She still lives with her mother and father, and Nick, well, he's still there too. He got arrested a couple times for guess what? A DUI, and is facing a 3-year sentence for being caught with some illicit drugs. Julia, well, she wanted to go to nursing school, but she did not get enough good grades for scholarships, and, well, our parents could not afford it. Speaking of my parents, they remortgaged their house to help Nick pay off the fines and lawyer fees that he was so in, which was all for nothing since he's probably going to jail anyways. Julia has to put some of her salary towards paying the bills and the house because my father suffered a back injury and can only do light-duty work. I wish them all the best, and by that I mean I wish them absolutely nothing. Sometimes, when I go to see my best friend at the diner I used to work at, he asks me, "Hey, do you miss them?" Well, to be honest, the answer is no. The more I hear about what's going on with them, the more I realized I've made the right decision. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. What if I was to tell you the story is not over here? I have 3 updates, and if you think OP was in a tough position, you have seen nothing yet because this story's about to turn into a whirlwind. I want to welcome you to the channel if you're new. Make sure you subscribe, hit those bell notifications right underneath this video. If you do that, it supports the channel and you never miss a daily video. Alright, let's hop into update number 1. So, the strangest thing happened the other day. It might be the stupidest decision I've ever made, but hey, I'm not really sure. I was working my normal shift at the restaurant when one of the waitresses pulled me aside. She said one of the diners were asking for me, but it was busy shift, so I told her, hey, they're gonna have to wait. She came back and told me they were willing to wait until the end of my shift to see me since it was very important. I was a bit weirded out, but I decided to at least hear what they had to say. Surely enough, at the end of my shift, he was still there. He introduced himself as my grandparents' lawyer and said they were trying to get in contact with me about my inheritance. First of all, I haven't seen my grandparents since I was 3. They pretty much kept to themselves, and I knew they were pretty wealthy, but I assumed whatever they had would go to my father or to their other kids. The guy left me with their number and told me to give them a call when I get a chance. Well, I called them up the next morning, and they seemed so happy to hear from me. They asked what I've been doing and up to for the last few months, and I told them about my new job, my new place, etc. My grandpa said he talked to my parents, and they said I'd up and left him out of the blue with no explanation, and they have not heard from me since. He said no respectable man would up and abandon his family. I said, well, I guess I'm not respectable then. I tried to explain to him the reasoning why I left, how miserable it was growing up in that household, and how much happier and fulfilled I felt now that I was on my own. I also told him it was better for children to leave the nest eventually instead of freeloading off their parents for, I don't know, the rest of their lives. He didn't seem convinced by my explanation, and he did not like that I went no contact with my family at all. My grandparents are extremely traditionalist and have this expectation that I should just grit my teeth and bear it. Even though my family was toxic as hell, I was supposed to stick around because they're family, and family is family. And you only ever get one, and you don't get to choose them, blah, blah, blah. I was rolling my eyes the entire time, honestly. My granddad said he and grandma were writing their will and wanted to leave their worldly possessions to their grandkids. Again, they're super traditional, so they believed in passing down their assets to the males. And since my father was the only one of the kids who had boys, that meant me and Nick, well, we're going to get everything. Now, my grandparents, even though I don't know much about them, I know that they're absolutely loaded. They've given my parents a house as their wedding gift. The money I could inherit from them would go so long, and I could get my own house as well, and I could further my culinary art studies and maybe even do a mentorship in France. But the problem was, there's a caveat. They won't name me in the will unless I reconnect with my family, and I'm not sure why they care so much or what they have to gain from financially gaslighting me into returning to the family. I'm telling you right now, though, no amount of money was worth the mental health, especially with all the garbage Nick was getting involved in these days. I asked if they could just give my share of inheritance to Julia. They refused. So I told them, you know what? Fine, keep the money. I'm not going back. Was it a dumb decision? Maybe. But no amount of money was worth my sanity, guys. Also, they're trying to manipulate me like this was off-putting. On the bright side, I'm no worse off now than I was before they reached out to me, and also I doubt my grandparents are going to keel over anytime soon. I'd have to endure my family for years before cashing in on the inheritance, and in my opinion, it's not worth it, but let me know what you think. Update number 2, and prepare yourself, this one is a whirlwind. I got some bad news. 2 weeks ago, my brother passed away from a fentanyl overdose. From what I've heard, he's been missing for a few days before the cops found him, and they took him to the morgue and my parents had to go identify him. I knew Nick was into some crazy stuff, but geez. For the record, I did not go to the funeral, but it's a small town, so it did not take long for word to get around. My parents could not afford to bury him, so they had a small funeral in the chapel of the funeral home and then had him cremated. He also left my parents with a ton of debt and legal fees that they're probably going to be paying off for the rest of their lives. My parents had the bad habit of constantly trying to bail Nick out of his issues because they think it would be better for their reputation just to not have him in jail. They care too much about what the town thinks about them, to be honest. Speaking of which, there's a lot of rumors floating about to why I was not present at the funeral. Apparently, my parents have been telling people that I moved to the city, and that's why I haven't been around. They also lied and said we still have a good relationship and that I send them money all the time. My friends told me about this a while back, and I didn't think anything of it. My parents have been liars their whole life, and I didn't care what they did as long as they simply did not bother me. But now, I was getting phone calls and phone calls and phone calls and messages from old high school acquaintances asking me why I did not come to my brother's funeral. I wasn't that far away, literally the next city over, and more than a few of them had seen me coming to visit the diner and catch up with my best friend, so you know what? I told them the truth. That I left my family and never looked back, and that I have not spoken to or seen them in ages. Heck, I've been so busy that I didn't know Nick was dead until the day before his funeral when I logged into Facebook and saw everybody sending their condolences. I said it. Everyone in town considered me and Julia the best of their kids, so now there's rumors and speculations flying around everywhere, and my parents' lies are starting to catch up to them. My parents had also lied about the reason for Nick's death, too. Officially, it was an overdose, but my parents were saying it was an aneurysm. I guess they didn't want people to know Nick was a drug addict. My best friend said that people who came into the diner are starting to ask questions, and he also showed me some passive-aggressive posts my mom had been making online. Something about raising kids to the best of your ability, and then said kids turning on you in the end. Do I feel bad for them? Well, yeah, a little bit. But I'm doing what's best for myself and my mental health, and also, I don't feel comfortable with my parents using me as a prop in the family, model facade. So I just shut that down quickly. Update number 3. It's been a few years. Hey guys, I haven't updated in a long time. It's been a few years, and more tragedy has struck my family again. My grandparents died. The reason I found out this is because their lawyer came back to the restaurant, and since Nick died, I was the only male grandkid left, which meant I'd inherited my grandparents' fortune. He told me to meet him at his office so we can sort out the paperwork. It took me a few days to process all this, and I'd suddenly become very wealthy out of the blue. When I met with the lawyer, he informed me that my family wanted to speak to me, and I asked why. They didn't give a reason, so I told him they need to outline exactly why and don't lie or else I was not speaking to them. Well, he called me later that day and said the reason they wanted to talk was because they were in dire straits. They could not keep up with the debt that Nick had left behind on top of their mortgage and bills. Their electricity and water had been shut off recently, and long story short, they needed help. Badly. I was so tempted to just spit in their face and tell them that they're getting what they deserved, but there was at least 2 innocent people involved. One was Julia, who was probably stressed out from my parents using her to pay off the debts, and the second was Carmen's kid, who was just that, a kid, and completely innocent in this mess, so I made some arrangements. I paid off the lights, water, and half of the mortgage only because Julia still lived at home. I was not paying Nick's debt. I refused. But I did set up an account with enough money for Julia to go to nursing school, and the money in there could be used for her schooling and nothing else, or I would take it back. I set up a fund to help get Carmen's kids through school as well. Again, the money was for school and nothing else. I also saw this arrangement as a way to get back at my grandparent for not only trying to manipulate me for being misogynistic, it would not have killed them to divide their wealth amongst all their grandkids. But I'm sure they're spinning in their grave right now as I was giving chunks of it away to my sister. My parents and Carmen were getting nothing from me, and I sent them a long letter detailing everything I did, why I did it, and what should have happened if the money I set aside was used for anything other than what I stated it was for. I told them this was the last time they'd hear from me, and not to try to contact me ever again. I also told my parents to stop taking advantage of Julia like they tried to take advantage of me. They tried to sweep Nick's nonsense under the rug, and they needed to deal with the consequences that of their own. The lawyer assured me that he'd make sure every single thing gets sorted out, so I started working on my own plans. I signed up for culinary art school in France, and I'm both excited and nervous, to be honest, as it was basically my dream to learn from renowned French chefs. I'm also selling my grandparents' monstrosity of a house, so I can buy something small. All in all, I'm happy with the way things are going. I'm already looking into accommodations in France, because even if I don't get into culinary school acceptance, I'd like to make a trip there for a food tour. Well, thanks guys. Wish me luck.
So this story was actually pretty sad. I mean, we had an overdose, and we'd had bullying, and just a lot of stuff that was happening, which can lead to a lot of mental problems, especially with what we saw, what OP went through. But I was actually quite surprised, guys, because I was reading the comment section, and, well, a lot of people were saying they don't really agree with what OP decided to do with the inheritance. And they also don't agree with the grandparents leaving it only to the males. So I just want to hear kind of what you guys think about that. What do you think about the grandparents leaving it to only OP? And also, do you agree with the majority of the commenters when they say OP should have paid off his older brother's debt because the parents, yes, he might have been the golden child to them and basically abused OP throughout his life, but some commenters were saying they don't understand the stress that the parents were going through knowing that their loved baby boy, their oldest son, was addicted to drugs. So yeah, there's a lot of opinions that go into this story, and we only really saw the perspective from OP. So I do agree with some commenters who are saying maybe there's more to the story than what we know. So guys, that's all I have to say. Let's talk about it in the comment section. Thank you for joining me on today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead, drop your thoughts down below, and make sure, guys, you hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no way I would have got this far without you guys. So go ahead, drop your comments, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you tomorrow, and just remember, it's cool to be kind.